Hi, I'm Marc, and welcome to the weekly Outside Views report on the politics in Asia and Oceania. You really don't need to be a geography pro to realize that Australia is far from Europe. Nevertheless, the fascination of Australians with the Eurovision Song Contest has always been great. The competition has been broadcast there regularly since 1983 and has achieved ratings that some European countries can only dream of. But why is that? Many Australians are particularly enthusiastic about the ESC and fought for a long time to finally be allowed to take part. The ESC, which has been taking place since the 1950s, has originally intended to promote the program exchange of the European Broadcasting Union, that's the EBU, and thus strengthen a European identity. Australia has also been part of the EBU since 1973 and would like to actively broaden the horizons of the population and bring them closer to the cultures of distant countries. And there's another reason. As an immigration country, Australia is deeply influenced by European influences. The documentary filmmaker Julia Nalivaiko actively campaigned for the ESC and Australia's right to participate in the show. By becoming part of Eurovision, we recognize that Europe is part of our national DNA, she said. It's been a long road to Australia's participation. The country has always tried to win the favor of Europeans and therefore even sent a message to the European audience in 2013. In 2014, the Australian singer Jessica Mauboy was allowed to appear as a guest of honor in the finals of the ESC, albeit without a rating. On the 60th anniversary of the Eurovision Song Contest in 2015, Australia got the go for the first time and went straight into the final in Vienna. And finally, from Australia to Austria. The joy in Australia was really great, and good things come to those who wait, because Australia has had many excellent performances and has always been able to hold its own against the competition. In the very first year of their participation, singer Guy Sebastian became fifth. A year later, Danny Im even made it to an impressive second place with her Sound of Silence. At the ESC 2023, Australia will take part in the second semi-final on May 12th, with a German, by the way. Daniel Estrin is part of the Australian contribution as the frontman of the progressive metal band Voyager. Should the country's success story continue with a place in the top 10, they could even compete in the final on May 14th. The competition will be held in Liverpool this year. And by the way, the next trivia game on Outside Views Games will also have the Eurovision Song Contest as its topic, because it's close. Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang has urged Japan to have a correct understanding of China. Despite all the differences, both sides should expand cooperation and deal appropriately with their differences. That's what Qin Gang said at the meeting with his Japanese counterpart Yoshimasa Hayashi in Beijing on Sunday, as the Foreign Ministry said. The relationship between the two neighbors is indeed strained. Japan increasingly views China as a threat and moves closer to the United States. In the face of contradictions and differences, block building, shouting and pressure will not help solve the problems, but will only deepen alienation, said Qin Gang in an apparent reference to Japan's alliance with the US. It was the first visit by a Japanese foreign minister to China since late 2019. Just under 2 months before the planned start of the tournament, the World Association FIFA withdrew the Football World Championship for U20 juniors from Indonesia. This is a reaction to the current circumstances after the stadium disaster last October and the restructuring of the National Association, as FIFA said. Before that, there had been a meeting between the head of the World Association, Gianni Infantino, and the president of the Indonesian Association, Erick Thohir. The World Association had held on to Indonesia as the host until the very end. The tournament was scheduled to take place from May 20th to June 11th with 24 teams. Indonesia should have hosted the U20 World Cup in 2021, but it was cancelled due to the corona pandemic. When it came to choosing the host, the Southeast Asian country prevailed over Peru from South America. A stadium disaster in Indonesia last October killed 135 people. After meeting with Prime Minister Joko Widodo last year, Infantino promised that Indonesia would remain the host. At the same time, an office with FIFA employees was set up to help the association with its restructuring. The protests in Indonesia against Israel's participation are not officially a reason for the reallocation of the tournament. With a population of around 277 million, Indonesia is the largest Muslim majority country in the world, has no official diplomatic relations with Israel, and is opposed to Israel's Palestine policy. In the Indonesian capital Jakarta, conservative Islamic groups recently protested against the participation of the Israeli selection. The governor of Bali, Wayan Koster, had also called for a ban on playing in Israel. If the Indonesian Association had complied with this requirement, this would probably have resulted in Indonesia being suspended by the World Association FIFA and thus jeopardizing Indonesia's participation in the 2026 Asian Championships. In rapidly aging Japan, more and more people die a lonely death. Because no relatives can be found to take care of the dead, more and more local governments have to bear the costs of cremation. The storage of the urns is also becoming a problem because nobody picks them up, as the Japanese newspaper Asahi Shimbun reported, citing the Ministry of the Interior. To get a more accurate picture of the growing problem, the ministry conducted a survey for the first time. According to this, communities are hoarding the remains of an estimated 60,000 dead, although not all of the bones that have not been collected are counted. Kodokushi, translated as lonely death, has long been a serious social problem in Japan. The population is shrinking and aging at a record speed. Last year, the number of births fell below the 800,000 mark for the first time, while the number of deaths rose to a record high of around 1.6 million. More than a quarter of the population is now older than 65 years. While in earlier times the young took care of the old, the trend today is towards the single family. At the same time, more and more people are living alone as a result of aging and changing lifestyles. Millions of senior citizens are affected by this trend. According to experts, North Korea has increased activities at its controversial Yongbyon reactor site in order to possibly obtain even more weapons-grade material for nuclear bombs. On the one hand, the 5-megawatt Yongbyon reactor is still in operation, according to the Stimson Center's North Korean news site 38 North, citing satellite images. On the other hand, there are indications that construction work on an experimental light water reactor is about to be completed. New construction work had also begun around the uranium enrichment plant. These developments may reflect the recent directive from ruler Kim Jong-un to increase the country's production of fissile material and expand its nuclear arsenal, it said. Currently, tensions on the Korean peninsula continue to rise. North Korea, largely isolated because of its nuclear weapons program, has repeatedly tested nuclear-capable missiles since the beginning of this year, despite UN bans. The United States and South Korea have resumed full-scale joint military exercises since last year. According to official figures, Russia increased its oil supplies to India by a factor of 22 last year against the background of Western sanctions. Most of our energy resources have been diverted to other markets in friendly countries, is what Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak told the Interfax news agency on Tuesday at a meeting of the Energy Ministry in Moscow. In addition to India, oil exports to China have also increased. In order to be able to redirect the energy exports, which have so far been oriented towards Europe, further measures are necessary. So Novak called for the expansion of their own tanker fleet. Russia already has one of the largest shadow fleets in the world. The resource power has bought scores of aging oil tankers to ship its resources despite Western sanctions following Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. According to Novak, however, insurance and payment issues must also be clarified. Moscow wants to switch from payments in dollars to transactions in national currencies. Own insurance companies are to replace the Western providers that have dominated the freight market up to now. In addition to oil, Novak also wants to ship more liquefied natural gas, since the pipelines to Europe have largely been shut down. To do this, the LNG projects would have to be promoted, he demanded. Russia has started several projects and is already supplying large quantities of LNG from the Arctic peninsula of Yamal to China, for example. However, the projects are associated with investments in the billions and a great deal of effort. Russia lacks both because of the sanctions. And this concludes this week's video on Asia and Oceanian policy, but you'll find the next one right here in the end screen, and I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.